This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence, and in this new series we are celebrating 20 years of the Association for Coaching by reflecting upon the journey so far. I meet with founders, coaches, leaders and members who contributed to the AC's journey to learn more about their experiences with coaching as part of our global community. Together we explore the impact that coaching has had on the world so far, what we need to be thinking about for the future to create more positive change whilst tackling some of the world's biggest challenges. Each week, you'll hear how coaches are working and collaborating as a global community together to advance coaching worldwide. Hello and welcome to another episode celebrating 20 years of the Association for Coaching. In today's conversation, I'm joined by three members of the AC to learn about what it means to be part of an emerging and truly global community. So more specifically, I have with me today Ian, Victoria and Jeffrey. Ian has had a role as the chair of the Northwest Europe region with the Association for Coaching. I have Victoria Leith with me, who is the head of international growth for AC and membership and accreditation, as well as Jeffrey Abbott down in Queensland, who is the director of Intercoach and also part of the AC Committee for Global Coaching Perspectives. And today we're going to be talking about the international perspectives and trends from a coaching point of view, as well as looking at some of the changes and some of the future of where coaching is going as part of the AC's journey over the last 20 years. Before we get stuck in, I'd love for each of you to perhaps introduce yourselves a little bit further in terms of how you got into coaching and how coaching shows up in the world for you today. Victoria, may I start with you?
Absolutely. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for the introduction. Great to be here with Jeff and Ian as well. So it all started for me in the AC back in, 2018. I'd recently come back from the UAE was drawn to the AC, came in working with Catherine Tulper, the CEO, actually kicked off as the international coordinator and Catherine's executive assistant, supporting all of the growth at the AC. We've got a big growth focus going internationally. My coaching started many years before that, probably 10 years ago actually, when I was in the UAE. It was 2012, started doing my MBA and really saw the impact of coaching as a leadership style. Been with the AC for 5 years. It's been great to see all of the growth, growing all the regions. I've worked with Ian in Northwest Europe regions for the past 5 years, and Jeff's also connected with the Queensland team. That's how I came to the AC. And a funny little anecdote was while I was in the UAE, I was doing my MBA at the time, and a friend working in L&D handed me a book, Coaching Women to Lead, and Catherine had actually written an endorsement on the book. So all those years ago, I didn't realise I'd be working with Catherine, but yeah, what a great surprise to stumble on that a few years later.
That's lovely. Thanks, Victoria. And for our listener, whereabouts in the UK are you?
I'm based in Nottingham, right centrally in the UK.
Great. Ian, if I may come to you, whereabouts are you and how's coaching showed up for you?
Yeah, I'm in Belfast, in one of the colder parts of the UK at the moment. I got into coaching probably about 14, 15 years ago. I was leading a department in Deloitte in Dublin, and I realised that I was spending more time with the people that worked for me, and I was coaching them rather than seeing clients mostly. And of course, as all true consultants do, I kind of I downwardly assimilated a few books about coaching and, cut the arms and legs off it and squeezed it into my normal consulting style and got it all wrong, really. And then I went and I trained as a coach then in Ireland. That would have been about 2010, I think. And I went along to an AC meeting and that was the beginning of my relationship with AC. It helped me a lot with undoing the downward assimilation. I began to hear real coaches talking. I began to, make connections as to really what it was all about. It really was very formative. Those early days of going to meetings with AC, goodness, I sound like it was AA there, but going to meetings about coaching, just being exposed to a community of people who did what I was aspiring to do helped me unlearn a lot of my bad practice.
Thanks, Ian, for that background. Jeffrey, how about you? Whereabouts are you and how did you get into coaching?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I'm in Brisbane, in Australia, and I got into coaching when I was studying psychology and just finished a psych degree while I was working in management at the Special Broadcasting Service in Australia, which is a TV radio station that broadcasts in multicultural, multilingual radio and TV, which is where my sort of intercultural background comes from. And I was looking to become a psychologist, sort of moving out of that role, which although I was enjoying it, and I came across a book that was co-written by Tony Grant, the late Dr. Tony Grant, who's very much a pioneer and a hero of the coaching industry. And so I went to see Tony and asked him about possibly doing a PhD in the area, and he agreed to be a supervisor. And I stopped work and went overseas to Central America and studied cross-cultural coaching of expats and acculturation through the ANU, and that sort of started my coaching journey. So I came back and worked a little bit in a coaching group in Sydney, and then more recently back to Brisbane with QUT, where I was Director of Leadership Coaching for about 10 years, and now doing more independent work. But all along, through editing a book on international business coaching, I came across many people, including Catherine, Darren Robson, and others through the Association for Coaching, and they've become a very important part of my coaching life and my life generally. So I still am very much connected as part of the editorial committee for Global Coaching Perspectives. So yeah, that's my kind of connection. I'm really interesting that Victoria mentioned leadership coaching. I think that's really important, and that's become a big part of my focus in training and in coaching to help leaders to be better coaches.
That's lovely. Thanks, Jeffrey. And that's a really insightful background there. And you mentioned a number of things which I'm sure will show up in our conversation today in terms of some of the current trends and themes and topics that are percolating around in the world of coaching today. So if I could stick with you, Jeffrey, I'm eager to learn from your point of view and the involvement that you've had. What have you seen as some of the benefits of global coaching communities like the AC as they've evolved from the time that you've been involved in coaching? You know, what are some of the benefits that they've brought to the world of coaching?
Yeah, I think there's a risk that coaching can become quite insular, and I think for me the benefit of touching with AC is it opens a lot of doors and in my thinking and working. For example, through AC I've come in contact with the foundation that Darren Robson runs with the Mo training programs, and that's introduced me to all sorts of different people internationally and in the UK. And this idea of having a fully global network, and when I was editing a book I was able to find people from all around the world through various networks, including ACs. So it constantly challenges my way of coaching. I'm conscious of different ways in the UK that coaching works, for example, even in Australia. And so that's constantly in my head about challenging my own way of thinking about coaching. So I think challenging my way of thinking is one of the big gifts.
Yeah, absolutely. Something we need to be thinking about, looking forward to, which we'll come to later as well. Ian, how about you in the sort of last 10 years or so in terms of your experience being part of a global community? What have been some of the benefits from your point of view?
I think you see, if you live in Belfast, you're kind of cut off from the bulk of the world anyway. And so it's been I'd echo what Jeff said about the real value of meeting people from different cultures, particularly, because that does challenge our perceptions of some of the ideas around coaching, because it is quite a Western mindset business, or at least a first world mindset business in many ways. And it's been, or at least it was when I came on into it all those years ago. But now I think it's become much more of a global enterprise. I think the AC community has been hugely helpful in exposing people to different ways of thinking, different ways of making meaning, different ways of understanding what's out there. And I think it's interesting that there are now, in the broader world of coaching, there's quite a lot of international communities springing up. And I think I think AC has been a real leader in bringing people together from different parts of the world and from different ways of seeing the world. And I think that's been a big impact for me.
That's great. Yeah, that leads me nicely to Victoria, and I'd love to sort of get your perspective on the same question.
Yeah, absolutely. And echo what Jeff and Ian have already shared. I think it's the inclusivity as well. It's the inclusive community that the AC's got internationally. We're all on a development journey, and we're in that together. So it's really tapping into that community. Like many of us at the AC and AC members, we've got international mindset. So it's being with like-minded people and wanting to make that positive impact. And what's been wonderful to see over the past few years is seeing the impact of coaching within business as well. You know, it really does make a difference to daily life. You know, echoing again what Ian said about the culture and the diversity of our members across the globe.
Yeah, so just sticking to that point a little bit there, Victoria, because you've got a unique view as the international head of growth within the AC. I'm curious as to what you see with the various different regions, because some are newer than others, and there are some that have been evolving at a different rate as well. So I'm curious, from your point of view, what do you see the various different regions bringing to the global community that perhaps didn't exist before?
Yeah, so over the past 5 years, we've had great wealth of growth across Australia. We've got teams in 5 states there: New South Wales, ACT, South Australia, Victoria and Queensland. We've had growth in USA, Canada, Greece, Northwest Europe, which Ian can speak to more, but growing teams and growing the AC presence in places like France and Benelux, which is Belgium, Netherlands and Luxembourg. So we do have regions that are clustered, DAC as well, Germany, Austria and Switzerland. And more recently in Southeast Asia, we've got a focus for growth there, and Africa and India as well. So that continues to grow. We've had existing regions for many years, like the UK, Ireland, Spain, Turkey, Italy and Denmark. So I do think over the next few years there's always going to be a focus for international growth. We might not be in every country, but we'll definitely be focusing in USA and Africa and Southeast Asia. That'll continue.
That's great. Thanks, Victoria. Lovely. I'd like to get into sort of past, present and future of coaching. But before we get into that, I'd love to get a bit more of a sense of what have been some of the more recent trends for each of you in terms of what you've seen coming new into coaching. So Jeffrey, may I ask you that question first, in terms of coaching's come a long way in 20 years and it probably looks quite different today as it did back then. So I'm kind of curious what are sort of some of the hot topics and themes today that didn't exist then, and perhaps also a little bit of a reflection on how coaching and attitudes perhaps towards coaching have changed as well.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest changes, coming back to the comment Victoria made about leadership and coaching, I think not so much institutionalization, but most big organizations in developed economies are using coaching in some form, and some have gone towards that mythical beast called a coaching culture. And it's kind of it's now unusual if you have a senior executive that doesn't know about coaching and most of them have a fairly positive view. So as you know, when all this first started, it was seen as a mysterious art, but it's now a little bit more mainstream. The HR departments that are doing the hiring of coaches are much more informed, a more systemic approach, where they're looking to link coaching to strategic directions. And so from that very sophisticated end, I think that organizations are using coaching a little bit more carefully and probably better, and it puts more pressure on the coaches. I think individual coaches just showing up are finding it harder, and that's why I think the Association for Coaching has been so important. It's had a more organizational focus than perhaps the other associations. The other thing that's, it's doing a chapter since, I don't know when the first edition was, but SAGE have the Complete Handbook of Coaching, which is edited by Elaine Cox. And I don't know when the first edition was, but we're now into the 4th edition. And I got asked, I was doing a chapter on paradoxical perspectives in cross-cultural coaching, and Elaine politely invited me to get somebody else to help me do the revision, which was a nice way of saying, Jeffrey, I think you're getting out of date. And, and spot on. So I have a friend a colleague who I met through the Ford Motor Company global coaching program, Ingela Gamba Ludlow in Mexico City. So she has been helping me open my eyes to some of the approaches to coaching that perhaps I was not looking at as carefully as I could. So we've revised it, and we've sort of looked at 3 phases of coaching in cross-cultural, intercultural coaching. The first one was very much about international companies and also religious groups. Some of the great researchers in this field are Mormons, and for very good reason. But it's very much Western organizations going into other countries, developing countries, and looking in their own way to make an impact and take advantage from whatever they're trying to achieve. The second phase, once coaching has become established in those other countries, like you mentioned India, you've mentioned different countries that are now actually producing coaches and starting to have their own way of coaching. So you have a much more interesting and diverse range of coaching in that second phase. And Philip Rosinski's work has been good in that phase of getting much more global in that true sense. And the third phase has been a challenging of the what I guess has been called the kind of weird approach. We've got a Western educated industrial something and developed. In psychology, a lot of our models come from the weird direction, and coaching's the same, and I think you touched on this, Rob. So now what we're finding is a really interesting introduction of some different thinking from indigenous backgrounds, from different cultural backgrounds, from really challenging this whole, and challenging the use of some of the accepted models, and even the use of models, and getting much more back to conversation and stories, and really getting a little bit more deeper into individual and contextual issues. So just to start the conversation, maybe that's a kind of, there's a lot to that. In the hour and a half, I could probably go for 3 hours, but I won't.
Another podcast for another day.
That's another podcast, yeah.
That's great. Yeah. There's so many thoughts and sort of various different sort of threads there we can follow. And that's a fascinating insight just to sort of hear how things have been evolving and changing. Your point there about sort of challenging accepted models, and also just this, what is the coaching way of thinking, and how does coaching show up in various different cultures? And we're starting to see a lot more of that. That's definitely been something that I would say has been a theme in this series. Philip Rosinski, we spoke with in one of the earlier episodes from this series, and that was certainly one of the themes that came up then. Ian, I'm curious as to your perspective, adding to Jeffrey and Victoria's perspective. What are you seeing?
Well, I think picking up on Jeffrey's last point there about, going towards conversations and away from being kind of hidebound by various models. I think also maybe the use of those conversations is moving a little bit. I think that there's a move, certainly in part of the coaching world, to move away from being so leadership focused and begin to think more in terms of society at large. At Harthill, the firm I'm a director in, we've been involved in 2 projects recently. One in northern Mali in Australia with indigenous leaders, which even though they were leaders, the conversations were much more societal in their context. And then we've been doing a little bit of work with a South African firm who is coaching in the area of politics, and that's really interesting. Coaching politicians, and I think the quality of the conversations is really all you have. It's a particularly interesting genre to be working with, but I don't think that a lot of our models would really cut a lot of ice there. And so it's the emergence in the moment of the conversation that seems to be where the focus is moving. I do think, I've noticed a change in people globally who've been coaching for quite a while, probably in 2 areas. There's the climate emphasis at the moment in coaching. That's becoming a significant emphasis, and one I think that is really worth digging into. And then team coaching has come in as well as a thing. But I think the big thing I'm noticing is a shift maybe from a transactional focus to some kind of a transformative focus, and a move away from the I more into the it of society at large. I mean, I guess once you go down the systemic rabbit hole, you end up going further than organizations, because they're just a subsystem of a bigger system anyway. So once you get there, I think that's a great place to be. But I am hearing, for people who've coached for many years, I'm kind of hearing the phrase, there has to be more than this. And I'm hearing that quite often. And I think that's going to be something we'll hear more of in the next sort of 5-10 years. Yeah.
That's a fascinating insight there. Thanks, Ian. Just exploring that a little bit more further for our listener and for my own curiosity, when you say you're sort of hearing that phrase more and more so these days, there has to be more than this. What does more look like?
Well, I think it probably will involve us looking very closely in a mirror and asking, who we're collaborating with as a let's call us a profession at the moment. But I mean, who are we unwittingly collaborating with, or colluding with, perhaps is a better word to be using. Who are we unwittingly colluding with? And if you look at the kind of neoliberal emphasis that's been there in much of my work in the past, I've been working with firms whose objectives and whose ethos I may not really have been completely on board with. I think younger coaches coming through are calling this out a little bit, and I think there's a colleague of mine, and we're thinking of having a bearing witness retreat for coaches in the heart of some major city, just to observe, the outputs from our work. And when she suggested that to me, I thought, that'll never fly. And the more people I talk to in the coaching world, they're thinking, wow, that'd be fantastic. So that's really what I'm saying. I guess when you're a young profession, you're really thinking about numbers and achieving and growing and all that kind of stuff. And then as you mature a bit, it's a bit like, for those, I'm terribly old, as you can see, but I think as a profession, it grows older, it becomes more reflective and asks itself some more challenging questions.
Yeah, you remind me actually, or rather you reveal to me, I would say, that actually something that's very evident, I believe, in coaching today is, as you say, the younger generation coming in with their own perspective and older generations having a certain perspective, but also discovering and understanding coaching too. And then this very interesting kind of discourse that's going on between sort of intergeneration, if you like, and how that's evolving and how that's changing our thinking, back to sort of Jeffrey's point a moment ago. Victoria, what would you add to that in terms of what you see from an AC point of view and working with the various different regions around do some of those themes and sort of topics that Jeffrey and Ian mentioned echo?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think coaching as a profession, across the globe is at different stages. There are themes and priorities. Jeff mentioned a while back HR, and I think there was a survey done by Gartner pretty recently, actually, talking about the challenges and priorities for 2023, which is leader and manager effectiveness, organisational redesign, maybe because of the pandemic. But employee experience is coming out a lot more. And to Ian's point about the more, I think people are wanting more from their employers as well. Coming back to Philip and Carol, they were talking about the quality of human relationships. It's all about the people. It's about the people and the employers having that sense of care and that duty of care. Again, within the business context, for me, it's the rise of the managers themselves. Managers are the ones having the one-to-one conversations, setting the culture, making the teams work to drive performance. And, we do have the leader coach offering, which Catherine and Alex mentioned on the first series. But it's about the future leaders, the emerging leaders, and are people ready for Gen Z and, importantly, Generation Alpha? Coaching is coming into education a lot more now. I know lots of local authorities and governments across the globe are addressing that and looking into that. And even in the UK, they've started bringing in something called ELSA, which is an educational psychology-led interventions to support, the development of children. So it's great to see that coming through in the younger generations, and I think there'll be more of that. But yeah, I think people are wanting more from their employers. People are employees, and I think businesses see, they've got these challenges in business with their employees, but it's recognising that these are people and the day-to-day really matters, and coaching can help with all of that, whether it's embedding a coaching culture in business or, making a difference to a project or someone's life.
That's great, Victoria. And that sort of leads me on one of the questions I wanted to ask about some of the challenges for coaches in the context of those broader global challenges that you're talking about there in terms of world and society. So I'm curious, what do we need to be thinking about going forward here in terms of what are some of the challenges today, and what do you think needs to be on our mind in terms of being aware of those challenges and perhaps what we could start to do about addressing them?
Great question, Rob. I definitely think it's around the future of work. With the pandemic, we've seen a lot more flexibility. There are some great employers out there. We've got quite a few corporate organisations at the AC that are global, and they're winning awards for making an impact in best places to work for culture. And more recently, I think there was an award for one of our corporates for best place to work for fathers and mothers that have got families, and incorporating that flexibility into work. So definitely looking at employee experience. I'm seeing a lot more of that in the HR world. People are recruiting for these employee experience roles to look at the future of work and how they can support their people.
If I may, with you, Ian, and Jeffrey, perhaps nuance the question a little bit more from a sort of leadership point of view. I'm seeing a lot of growth in the leadership space in terms of how coaching is showing up. So I'm curious as to what may be some of the challenges in that realm. Ian, if I could start with you.
Well, one of the interesting lenses, which I'm sure will bring a lot of challenges, ethical and otherwise, is the Great Resignation phase that we're in, and where do coaches sit in terms of either facilitating or not facilitating that in its happening. Because it's very difficult for a coach to say, I'm agnostic about what's happening in this room with the person I'm working with. It's all your decision. It's all your stuff. How do I support? And so I think it's going to put a little bit of pressure on the three-way relationship between organization, coach, and leader, and will raise quite a few ethical questions. I think in terms of leadership of our profession, which is an interesting one, I'm sensing, particularly in the world of supervision, that as coaches grow and mature, perhaps some of our containers for supervision need to be looked at, because they are kind of formulated around a construct of a young profession with some older mentoring type people who bring us, and certainly we're at our own firm are experimenting with the idea of groups where everybody's holding the space and everyone's making meaning together. And then you ask, well, what's the point of the supervisor here? And so a whole different point begins to emerge, which is actually to jump in and lead by learning, as opposed to lead by doing the reverse of learning, by imparting. And that's another interesting, I think, challenge the professional have to face. As more and more people want to have an adult relationship with their own practice.
Lovely. Thanks, Ian. Jeffrey?
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about leadership and particularly some of the embedded mindsets that people have about what it means to be a leader. And I think this, when we're thinking about, I've noticed coaching getting into schools, like grade 4 kids learning the GROW model and starting to use coaching approaches, and also much more of a shift to group coaching approaches. And I think the more we look at leadership as sitting outside of formal corporate structures and more looking at how, like in this conversation, who's leading? How are we leading this conversation, and what role do we play? And being mindful of that in the moment and teaching people that it's important in a group that everybody is sharing it. And I think this is where some of the ancient practices of. And I remember the AC did this fantastic edition of Coaching Perspectives back in January, which focused entirely on cross-cultural coaching. And one of the articles raised the power of Ubuntu, or both. It's also sort of both, though, from Africa, which the shift was, and I know Desmond Tutu used this in the time of apartheid, and it's the shift from this I think, therefore I am, which is Descartes, and shifting more to the way they describe it, I am only because we are, which is a very fundamental shift about people growing in relation to each other. And if that was embedded, I remember when I went to a private school and a very traditional kind of private school, and straight away the leadership model there was about hierarchy. It was about choosing prefects who are senior people in the, and they are allowed to bully other people. And this is inherent in a lot of our unstated, but inherent in a lot of our associations. The way the building I live in is run, we've had problems with autocratic building managers and all sorts of things. So it's coaching has a role in helping people understand what a shared leadership approach might look like and how innovative and contextually appropriate leadership might look. And I think this is something that's a real contribution that coaching can make.
Yeah, that's really insightful. Yeah, you've got me thinking about all sorts of different directions I could sort of take this conversation in. But I love this idea of a sort of shared leadership approach, speaking to some of what Ian and Victoria were saying there. In terms of the actual, Jeffrey, just again from sort of your point of view, in terms of as a global community, and as the AC is sort of 20 years old, it's come a long way, but it's still got such a long way to go, I suppose, in the context of our conversation today. What do you think are some of the challenges and what we need to be thinking about in terms of, as a community body working together, what more could we be doing? What more do we need to be thinking about in terms of perhaps involving more, and just thinking there about your sort of shared leadership approach and how that might show up? Multiple leaders in multiple regions, and what we could all be thinking about, what we could be doing to harmonise and perhaps integrate and share our thinkings and our learnings together.
Yeah, I think it's happening. I think I've noticed a variety of different activities that I see are running, and I like the way, I think it's in the Canadian group, that we can offer each area, which has its own perspective, can offer something different using the virtual platforms, so that if I'm sitting in any country in the world, I can come into something being offered, a conversation. It doesn't have to be a presentation. I was thinking maybe of doing something around bring your favorite philosopher along and have a chat. It's kind of breaking open the thinking and challenging each area where AC shows up to have something that reflects their way of thinking and offer it out there in the space. So getting very organic conversations going between people, which might lead to something different. And using, I talk a little bit of complexity theory, which a big part of that is when you get people in a complex system interacting a lot, then funny things start to happen and energy starts to work in funny ways. And so then the idea is to work out what's happening and try to take advantage of whatever's emerging without trying to control it, just by kind of looking at what's happening from the interactions and then going with it. And I think AC has a wonderful opportunity to harness and encourage just very organic growth and emergent processes.
That's great. Thanks, Jeffrey. Just jumping over to you, Victoria, off the back of what Jeffrey was saying there, are you starting to see some of that, certainly in the last few years, and perhaps your time with the AC, there's definitely been an increasing momentum between the regions and the interactions there, and perhaps goes without saying, the pandemic offered a big shift as well in terms of in-person, hybrid, and also virtual events and virtual interaction. So what have been some of the changes that you've seen, and what's working, and perhaps, what could we be doing more of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the pandemic has brought us global at home, if you like, tapping into that international community. From a CPD point of view, there's been a lot of regions coming together and having a truly global event. So, again, building on what Jeff's just said as well, Andy, and we're seeing a lot more of that harmony in coming together as a community, and that is rippling out into businesses as well. moving away from hierarchy in business and society, and many years ago leading by fear, moving away from that, and to Ian's point, lead by learning. And I think some of this comes back to the coaching competencies as well. It's that working in partnership and that trust-based relationship. So yeah, definitely globally, there's been a shift in how we learn, how we work, and seeing the regions come together on initiatives, working at one has been phenomenal. And I think behaviours have changed, and I think there's been some great things come out of the pandemic actually, to bring countries and regions together. So yeah, I think there will be a bit of a lasting legacy there, moving forward.
Thanks, Victoria. Ian, I'd love to hear your sort of thoughts, particularly over the last few years, how things have changed in terms of the interactions.
Yes, I mean, I've got to tap back into the pandemic thing, because I think we've crossed the Rubicon. We're not going to go back over very easily, which is we've moved into being an international community. So I think there will be questions around regions. And I kind of like Jeff's point as to maybe each region can bring something to the whole, as opposed to trying to be the whole in their space. And I think that would be a really wonderful move forward. I think also there's a bit of an emphasis around looking at capacities more than competencies, or at least alongside competencies. It's a bit like your mobile phone. There's so many apps you can put on, but ultimately you have to upgrade the operating system. And certainly in my early days of going to events, it was really competency based. So what do we do with the competency? How do I grow myself? Is going to be a really big thing in the future that I think we need to kind of latch onto and reflect and promote. I mean, maybe there's a space to look at what do we think are the upgrading things that are relevant for coaches to be plugging into, which will kind of turbocharge their competencies, or in fact may even lead us to look for other competencies. I don't know. The thing I like about the coaching profession is we're never afraid to unlearn. And the thing I like about AC is we're not afraid to unlearn. I kind of sense we're coming towards that sort of a phase.
That's great. Thanks, Ian. And with that sense in mind around the future of coaching and what you see on the horizon in terms of what's coming down the line now from your point of view.
It's interesting, isn't it? When a profession begins to grow up, as 20 years old, I mean, we're not a lot younger than the vast majority of coaches' careers. In fact, we're older than probably most. I'm not sure what the exact numbers are, but I'd say 20 years represents a decent sized chunk of the history of most coaches. So I think at that stage, if we look at our transactional analysis model, when do we begin to treat each other like adults, and when do we begin to see ourselves as being adult, and how do adult professionals work? And how would we have a relationship with potential regulation? There's an interesting one. But fundamentally, I think there's a return to something, a return probably to the idea that a coaching conversation, be it with a person or be it with a team, is simply a succession of moments in time when people are being with each other. And that, I think, is probably a big part of our future, exploring how to be without trying to shape, or without trying to fix, or without trying to generate some kind of explosive moment whenever the person we're doing it to suddenly sees everything, And so I think that a rediscovery of being with, and the art of being with, and what it means to be with, is probably a pretty important agenda item.
That's lovely. Thanks, Ian. Jeffrey, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I was just strongly agreeing with what Ian was just enjoying agreeing. You see that the word mindfulness now comes up as being the kind of the word of I think the word of the year was gaslighting, but mindfulness is a better word. I think being mindful in our conversations and encouraging that. And I think the expertise of coaches who are, true professional experts, I think there will always be a place. And I think that's really important. But also I've noticed some resistance to the thought that leaders can coach their staff. Like in an organization, a leader can actually coach their direct reports. Some coaches vehemently oppose that idea. They think it's not possible because of promotion, because of pay, because of context, power. But I don't know, as an executive coach, those things of power and money and all that come into it too. But I think the fact is, as Ian said, it's a conversation. And as a human being, if you can have a different kind of conversation with the person that you're managing, then all sorts of things are possible. And I think you do see that. You see pockets in organizations where somebody or groups of people have agreed some different ways of operating. And it works really well, but it may not work forever. So you see this coming together of that sort of approach, and then something happens and it falls apart and coming together. So you need the pressure to keep those sorts of processes going together, and don't panic when they fall apart again, and then let's get trust people to bring them together again. It's a very fluid approach, and there's nothing wrong with hierarchy in itself, but how is it played, and are people mindful of the way that it plays out in their context?
Victoria, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one to watch, or at least it's going to be interesting to see how, with more awareness that there is with future generations, coaching future generations, and even in business, to Jeff's point, coaching teams, but intergenerational coaching as well, with a new generation coming up. So there's more awareness of coaching. So watching that over the next few years, and how AI and tech comes in to complement coaching, I think that's going to be one to watch. Be interesting to see how that maps out.
It's been a lovely conversation. It's been very insightful. I've been making lots of notes here. There's lots of thoughts and ideas, and it's amazing. You can spend a lot of time in this space and still get so many new ideas. I'm learning in our conversation today. But as we begin to wrap up, I'd love to sort of just reflect on your own coaching journey, and to your earlier point, Victoria, about the impact of coaching. And I'm curious to learn from each of you, what has been the impact of coaching on you? So, Victoria, if I could stay with you and ask you that question, please.
Wow. Overall, it's been life-changing for me, Rob. Really has. The AC and the people and the members within the AC and the central leadership teams, the regional chairs, they make a difference to my life. They make me happier. It's just been totally life-changing in a positive way. And that coming back to that sense of inclusivity, I think many years ago, and even up until about 10 years ago, I think I felt like a bit of a misfit. So I feel like I've found my place in this like-minded community to get through the journey that we call life. So it's been very profound for me.
Is there any sort of standout moments, or a standout moment in your mind where you mentioned life-changing there, but I'm sort of curious to explore a little bit more there?
I've had a lot of new perspective over the past few years. So the pandemic touched me, and I lost my parents. So bringing that new perspective in, and actually did some training with Ian's organisation, Heart Hill. It was really profound for me at that moment in time. It got me through. Really did get me through the unlearning. It's been such a massive help to get that perspective and that clarity. To bigger questions in life, why we're here. And again, I think for me personally, it comes back to the journey, my journey, and the journey being together with people.
It's lovely. Thanks for sharing that with us, Victoria. Jeff, how about you?
Yeah, I think over time, hopefully, my interaction with coaching and as a philosophy, as a life, and with the people in the AC and other people, that I've hopefully a bit worn off and I've become a slightly better person. I don't know. But and life throws stuff at you. And this year I've had some things thrown at me I didn't expect. An expression of eating your own cooking. I've had to look at some of the stuff that I can do as a coach and apply it to myself. And I think that's been very helpful to me to fall back on and to work through some issues and to deepen my relationships with people and have better conversations and deeper, more real conversations, and set my life up in a way that's more satisfying. So I think it is life-changing, but it takes time. There's a lovely, just if I may, Tyson Yunka Porter is an indigenous poet, writer, and he talks about indigenous thinking that people never go in a linear direction. He said that the road is always going in different directions. He said that thousands of years ago, somebody in the tribe tried to go in a straight line, and they threw him up in the air, and he disappeared. So that was the.
Love that.
So it's kind of, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So,
yeah, it's a non-linear journey. Absolutely, I love that. Ian.
Yeah, I was just sort of coming in on the back of Jeff and the poetry, and saying that there's this wonderful Mary Oliver instructions for living a life, which is pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. And I think coaching's brought me there from being, whenever you're a consultant, you have a theory for everything. And so then coming into having a theory for nothing has been a profound life switch for me, and being open to everything. And as Victoria and Jeff were saying, having conversations that really matter, and finding that I'm not even sure anymore if the coach and the client, that's not a one-way developmental journey. It's a two-way developmental journey. My most recent teacher who was coaching me this week is my 12-year-old granddaughter. And we were talking, for whatever reason, the conversation came up about Terry O'Fallon's layers of awareness. And we were talking about how both of us are really useless in being aware of stuff in the concrete realm. We trip over stuff, we don't see stuff, we miss the obvious, and everybody thinks we're klutzes, but we were comforting ourselves that, she was comforting me more, that actually we are people who are kind of into meta-aware stuff. We're up there observing important things. And I suddenly realized two things. Number one, hey, we've got a little bit of work to do here around our view of ourselves. But B, I would never have envisaged when I was 12 that an adult would talk to me about those things. And I think coaching really opens the door for us to have incredible conversations with those we love. And that's what it's done for me. As long as we, don't inhabit the role and kind of come as a person, then I think it's a great way to be.
That's fabulous. Thank you for sharing that insight and perspective, Ian. I really love that. Just before we wrap up, I'd love to invite you all to share with our listener where they can reach out to you. They might like to connect with you. One of the great things about this podcast is it makes connections, and it creates connections for listeners to be able to reach out and get in touch with people all across the planet. But before I invite you to share those details, I'd just like to ask each of you if there's any other sort of final thoughts or anything else that we perhaps didn't get round to covering today that we could be thinking about in the context of being part of a global community. So perhaps, Jeff, if I could start with you.
I'm thinking, I don't think so. It's been a great conversation. Again, it's challenged my thinking. And I think in coaching, I remember from the thinking environment work that if as coaches we are great thinking partners, then we've done our job. If you can get people to think differently, then that's really all we can do. And the more different ways of thinking there are, the better. I remember Fons Trompenaars, who for many, many years has been an expert in the intercultural space. He describes or defines coaching or culture as a different way of solving problems. So if we can bring our different cultures and identities and ways of thinking into the room, then we've got lots of different ways of solving some of these apparently intractable problems that are facing us.
That's a lovely final thought there. So thanks for that, Jeff. Victoria, any final thoughts?
I'd echo what Jeff said, and bringing in something that Ian said at the start of the session. It's about looking in the mirror. As individuals, we're making that change, and if we keep the awareness going and, follow the approach that Jeff's just talked about, it's really going to make it a better place, better lives. So yeah, look in the mirror. Thank you,
Victoria. That's great. And Ian?
I'm interested in how we could explore, and we hadn't time today, but how can we, to pick up on something Jeff said, how can we explore the idea of leadership all over the park? It's like the Irish rugby team, who with a collection of reasonably average players have got to be number one in the world, simply because we've got this understanding that everyone on the team is a leader. And so we're leading all over the park. And I think we could see quite an explosion in our AC community if we could find a way of embedding this notion that everyone can lead in the community in an appropriate way and at an appropriate time.
Thanks for that lovely thought there. Jeff, where can our listener reach out to you should they wish to connect with you and learn more about the work that you do?
Yeah, sure. I put in the chat that Australia made the last 16 in the World Cup, by the way, just to make that clear. My email, GOFFA @intercoach.net. And so I'd be delighted to hear from anybody who'd like to have some ideas. And I love what Ian's saying about let's find some ways of just generating some conversations around the world with different people. It's without trying to control it. Yeah.
That's lovely. Thanks, Jeff. And yeah, we'll put all of the details and the links in the episode show notes, which you can find on associationforcoaching.com. Ian, where can our listener reach out to you?
So it's Ian, IAN, at Harthill without an E, HART, Hill, all one word, all lowercase, .co.uk.
That's great. Thank you. And Victoria?
You can contact me at victoria@associationforcoaching.com. And if there are any companies listening that want to learn more about AC corporate membership or embedding coaching cultures at work, you can contact us at corporate@associationforcoaching.com. And if you want to reach out to me personally, you'll find me on LinkedIn, or you can reach me at hello@iecld.com.
That's lovely. Thank you. Jeff, Ian and Victoria, thank you so much for joining me today.
Been a pleasure, Rob. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Victoria. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. I'm Rob Lawrence. For 20 years, the AC's purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations, and societies worldwide. To find out more about the Association for Coaching and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or explore our website at associationforcoaching.com. You can keep up to date with our latest podcast episodes, enjoy the wealth of digital learning offerings, and gain insights from our Coaching Perspectives magazine.